If you like this episode, please subscribe, share with others, rate and review so we can continue to bring you great programming.
This is The Thing About Cars, a podcast for car enthusiasts and the people who love them.
Hello and welcome to The Thing About Cars. I'm Nicky Desai, very happy to be sitting across the table again from Tom Glatch. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Vicky?
I'm doing great, thank you. And of course, our regular contributor, Dave Pauly. How are you, sir?
You have no idea whether I'm regular or not. And I don't appreciate you bringing it up.
I'm concerned, it's the whole fiber intake thing and staying out too late drinking and stuff like that. But
you don't know. You don't know me, mister.
Well, we're here today to talk to Tom. And Tom, it's good to see you again. Where Tom has co-written? Written, right?
Well, it's co-written, and I can explain that later, but yes.
It's the complete book of AMC cars from our friends at Quarto Publishing. And it's, again, no surprise, just a fantastic looking coffee table book. Lots of really cool pictures in it. Let's just jump into it. So, Dave, you've read the book. You've walked through it at least. So how do we start the conversation about the book?
Yeah, thanks, Mickey. Tom, like I said, not only is it a beautiful book, it is a fascinating book. And one of I was fascinated by a couple of elements. First of all, my grandfather almost exclusively drove Nashes.
There you go.
So the history of, I think, Nashes and Hudsons. I think that what really captured me is because I teach business strategy to college students, is how much the book actually talks about the business decisions AMC made over the course of the history that led to the car and design decisions. So I want to start at the beginning. AMC was created through the merger of Nash Kelvinator and the Hudson Car Companies. But this was originally envisioned as a three-way merger with Packard. Tell us about what happened.
Well, in the big picture was George Mason really wanted to build an empire that could compete against the big three, GM, Ford, and Chrysler. And he wanted to do it by merging Hudson, Nash, and he was the CEO of Nash, Packard, and hopefully Studebaker. And if you think about the products they were making at the time, Nash made big full-size cars, so did Hudson. Studebaker made great trucks and nice cars too, and Packard was the creme de la creme of American cars. So you could have one company that delivered everything just like GM does, or just like Ford did with Lincoln all the way down to Ford. It was a brilliant plan. It just didn't work out, unfortunately. James Nance had taken over leadership at Packard, who bought out Studebaker eventually. And he thought he knew more about the car industry than George Mason, unfortunately. Mason was a brilliant guy. Nance came from Hot Point Appliances. So he was better suited to making refrigerators and stoves than he was Packard's. And that really is what scuttled the whole thing. So Packard and Studebaker went their way. We saw how well that worked. And Nash and Hudson became American Motors. And for 34 years, they delivered.
34 years.
Yeah, think about it. And a David versus Goliath, like unbelievable proportions. Chrysler was always number 3, always on financial. Sometimes they were doing okay. They had a lot of mismanagement. AMC was tiny compared to Chrysler. And then you put them against General Motors, let's say, or Ford, they were a speck. The other companies really didn't even pay attention to them. And yet they were able to deliver some really nice cars.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Early in the book, there are some references to cool failures like the Hudson Italia, but
right.
There are essentially 6 models, right? So 2 Nashes, 2 Hudsons, the Metropolitan, and the Rambler. What markets was the new AMC targeting with those models?
Well, those came in prior to the merger. So the Italia was unfortunately one of Hudson's failures. They built 23 or 26, and really not that pretty of a car. The Nash Healey was a gorgeous car, very powerful, ran at Le Mans, but it just, with the financial situation at the time, with the big recession in 1953, with Ford and Chevrolet going head to head, flooding the market with cars, didn't even care about making a profit. They just wanted to flood the market with cars. It just wasn't the time to have a halo car like a Nash Healey. So that got dropped. Uh, they were hoping that the big Nashes and Hudsons, which now were basically one platform but with their own distinct look, and the Ramblers could take on the other companies and survive. As it turned out, it was the Rambler that was the success story, and that's what really became American Motors.
So I started my career actually as a wind tunnel test engineer. I was surprised to read early in the book that AMC was the first company to wind tunnel test its cars.
That's right.
Were there other engineering first?
Air conditioning. Air conditioning. The first practical air conditioning in an automobile called it. And it became because they were part of Kelvinator was part of Nash. So they used their refrigerating expertise, built a unit that fit under the dash, not in the trunk like Packard and Chrysler did, cost $300, and became the model that literally today's air conditioning systems still follow.
Very cool.
It was very cool. Actually, they were the first with a real heater too that used fresh air, brought it through the cowl, and again, that dates back to 1936.
Good grief! Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So I did not know that Dave started his career as a wind tunnel test engineer. And there's jokes in there that I don't.
So that's what happened. Yeah. Yeah. That's why his hair goes straight back, right? Yeah.
I'm not a blow. When people call me a blowhard, it's not a euphemism.
I'd love to hear more about that, though. Really.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by wind tunnel testing. I don't know why I am, but I am. So, all right. So let's fast forward to 1958. 1958 is a big year for AMC. They scrapped Nash. They scrapped Hudson. What were the two legacy brands, and why did they double down on Rambler?
They were in survival mode already at this point. And George Romney just felt that Rambler was the right car for the right time. And he was a super hardworking guy. People loved him. His employees loved him. Very religious man, didn't work Sundays, didn't swear, smoke, drink, even caffeine. He was just a model citizen.
He was a Mormon?
And he felt that the market was right for a compact car, which they already had in the Rambler. He literally doubled down. They had almost no money left. He took what little they had, upgraded the existing 56 Rambler into a really stylish, good-looking, but still practical compact car, and just beat the market. By 1960, they were number 3 in sales.
Wow.
Ahead of Plymouth.
So I would like to note, if the rest of my colleagues were here, I would put this out there. I bet I am the only person on the Thing About Cars who has actually driven a 1959 Rambler Metropolitan.
Oh, okay.
In high school, one of my best friends, Todd, was gifted it by his grandmother who had bought it new. And this is, 1981, 1982, really the car every 16-year-old boy dreamed of driving at that time.
A real chick magnet, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. But let's talk about design, because lots of the cars in the 1950s, especially in the book, the term European styling comes up a lot. And the style was really different from the more quote-unquote aerodynamic or streamlined modern cars that the competition was putting out.
Right.
Was there a specific strategy, or was it just an aesthetic preference?
I think it was just an aesthetic preference, especially with George Mason. He liked the bathtub look of the Nashes. Pininfarina actually bought in and did some of the design work for them, which was shocking. But again, a small company, they had a very small design staff, and Mason wanted to give them an air of credibility. Well, Pininfarina will do that. And it worked. And even like the Metropolitan, that was a very interesting hybrid British-American car. They were built in England. They used Austin engines. They were built by Austin. But you could see by the unit body and the design that it was American Motors did a lot of the work. And a cheap little car, cheap in price, well appointed. And, for someone living in a major metropolitan area, what a great car to drive and park, if you think about it.
It was a great car to park. It also had no seatbelts, which I found a little alarming at the time. But
well, most cars didn't until the 60s.
Yeah, that's true.
Until the mid-60s at least. And even then, being a product of the 50s and 60s, you didn't use them. You tucked them under the seat and off you went. So, yeah.
Speaking of the 60s, in 65, the same year Dave premiered. AMC premiered the Marlin, which you describe as America's first man-sized sports fastback. But does a sports fastback seat 6?
Well,
that seems like a rather large sports car.
The story behind the Marlin was quite convoluted anyway. They had done a show car in '64 called the Tarpon, based on the Rambler American. Man, was that little car cool! It was like the Barracuda, where you took a Valiant and put a fastback on it, but instead of just a glass fastback like the Barracuda, it was sheet metal. It was really well styled. Dick Teague and his young design staff were outstanding. They were brilliant designers, and they were young. Average age of 32 in 1966, I think it was, and they were car crazy. They were hot rodders. They were car nuts like we are, but they were talented, unlike us. So the Tarpon was a beautiful little car. That's what they wanted to put into production. And Roy Abernathy, who was the successor to George Romney as CEO of American Motors, goes, no, too small. I want it on the bigger platform, which they did, and it looked great. If you look at any of the styling photos, and then he gets in the back seat, and he was over 6 feet tall, 300-pound guy, not enough room. Raise the roof 6 inches. Well, in styling, a fraction of an inch one way or another can make a car look right or not. 6 inches just ruined it. Still looks good, but from certain angles, the top is really too high and back. It didn't slope like it should have, and that didn't help. But they're really neat cars, gorgeous interiors. Really, I like them. It's just different.
So, while we're in the '60s, you're alluding to something there about that's kind of a meddlesome management decision, and there's another, and I teach management, so that I really fixate on this. Because also at this time period, AMC tries to sunset the Rambler brand and struggles. And I question both because, to your point, the Rambler had been a really successful brand. Why do you think they decided to sunset the brand, and why do you think they struggled doing so?
Well, very simply, the demographics were changing. If you think of the people that were buying cars in the 50s, they grew up during the Depression. They lived through the sacrifices of World War II with rationing and victory gardens and things like that. They were much more practical. Now you're getting into the 60s, and those early baby boomers post-war are now at the age of buying cars. And they weren't looking for Ramblers. They wanted something with style, with performance, Mustangs, Camaros eventually, Dodge Chargers, things like that. So the feeling was, and probably rightfully so, the Rambler name had a negative connotation now to this newer demographic. And so they started transitioning from calling the cars Ramblers to calling them American Motors or AMCs. And really the only one that carried the Rambler name was the American, which was their compact, very successful compact car that still had that Rambler ethic to it, while the other cars, and this was again Roy Abernathy trying to take on the big three head on, which again, as a management decision, did not work. It cost them a ton of money. In hindsight, it did work out because now they had a lot of products that they could carry on into the 70s, but it hurt them financially to do it. Thankfully, they survived, but it was not probably the best strategy when he was forced to leave the company because of the financial losses. They then went into more of a niche mode, pick your targets, fill in places that the big three were missing, just like the Rambler did in the 50s, and target those types of cars. And that was very successful for them.
Was it good strategy to bring up the premiere of the Gremlin on April Fool's Day in 1970?
No, probably not. Probably not. And yet, what a neat little car.
AMC Gremlin. Yeah.
AMC Gremlin. And what you have to understand is mechanically, because they were so small, they designed their platforms to be very modular. They designed the Hornet, which was somewhat based on the American, but with a lot of improvements, but with a section about 12 inches long behind the front seats that could be stamped out, shorten it up, weld it in, take the front of the Hornet, take the back end of some new sheet metal, voila, for very little money, you had the Gremlin. And the Gremlin was hugely popular in the early 70s. I remember, they were just the coolest little car. And then the oil crisis hit.
Yeah.
Now, just like the Rambler back in 58, perfect timing.
Actually, that's a good point because starting in 1970, AMC buys Jeep from Kaiser.
Right.
We've got inflation. The oil embargo comes along. AMC's focus on smaller, more economic cars should have made it the perfect brand for the time. Did it?
It did for a while.
Hmm.
It really did. Just like the Rambler did in the late 50s. However, when the economy started to improve, people wanted bigger cars. And even though AMC had bigger cars, they didn't have the funds to make them as appealing as, say, the Rambler was or the Gremlin was when times were tougher. And not necessarily their downfall, but
Right.
it didn't help their situation, put it that way.
Okay.
And it's timing. Timing is
Sure.
everything in the auto business. There's the 3 years at least from a new product development to hitting the showrooms. Well, nobody knew that in 73 you'd have the first oil embargo. Nobody knew it. So sometimes it worked. In the case of the Gremlin and the Hornet, it did. Sometimes, like the revised fastback AMC Matador, which came out in 74, well, that was bad timing. Great car, beautiful car. Nobody wanted a big 6-passenger fastback coupe at that time. And it just didn't sell as well as they had hoped.
I can't even tell you the last time I thought of the AMC Matador.
I've actually driven one.
Have you?
Yeah. Yeah. A friend of mine, when in the 80s, we would drive to sci-fi conventions across the Southeast in his AMC Matador. And
looked like a space shuttle.
It totally did. And it looked like, we have stories about how when we arrived at one destination, we realized why the car was running so badly there was a dime-sized hole in the radiator.
That might do it.
That we're like, oh, okay. So thankfully it did not damage the engine. We had to, as poor high school and college students, had to figure out how to get it fixed before driving home. But, gum. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dave?
So I gotta bring it up. The Pacer. You tell in the book, you tell the story of what the Pacer was intended to be.
Correct.
Yet by the time it rolls off the assembly line, it's described as, quote, like a fat girl wearing a dress that's too small.
Correct.
Unquote. Tell us the story.
Well, they again rolled the dice, thinking again America needed a smaller car, but one that was really thoroughly modern. Modern handling, modern performance, modern fuel economy, and a revolutionary shape. It was really the first cab forward design. If you look at what Chrysler did in the 90s with cab forward, Pacer was there already. And it was supposed to be powered by a revolutionary new engine, the Wankel. They actually thought about building their own. They eventually used General Motors, who had spent billions developing the Wankel, and it was ready to go. So the whole car was designed around this compact little engine. It's the size of a suitcase. It was also designed, a lot of glass area, very unique shape, hatchback, which was again fairly revolutionary back then. There were a couple of hatchbacks at the time, like the Vega, but it was a pretty cool design. And then everything just went to hell, pure and simple. The lawyers came in and said, they're thinking about proposing more side impact regulations. We need to bump the sides of the car out more. Well, now it went from this really sleek, modern shape to this fat girl with too tight of a dress. Then the Wankel program got killed instantly. GM just pulled the plug on it. When they determined that they couldn't meet emissions, they couldn't meet fuel economy, they said they had the oil seals figured out, which maybe they did. But we all know Wankels have had a history of fuel economy, emissions, and oil burning. So the car was designed around this compact little engine. Now, they did have a plan B in place, but it really threw the car off having a 6-cylinder inline six up front rather than this compact little revolutionary engine. They were talking about doing front wheel drive. They just didn't have the resources to do it. But boy, they would have been really ahead of everybody then. It just didn't work out. And it was becoming the era of government oversight of everything in the auto industry. So it isn't just the Pacer. It's the 10-mile-an-hour bumpers that look horrible on most cars. It was regulations that were just, safety is a great idea. Lower emissions, better fuel economy. Those are all wonderful ideas. But unelected bureaucrats that knew nothing about the auto industry was imposing these draconian regulations. that the industry could barely keep up with. Even in the late 70s, General Motors said their cost of compliance was $1 billion. They could afford $1 billion. Chrysler couldn't. They almost went bankrupt. Lee Iacocca in his book said they had to submit something like 140,000 pages of documents a year. They barely had the resources to do that. AMC didn't have any of that. The one good thing is the government did allow them to partner with General Motors and share some of GM's emissions technology. But that's what drove AMC, it drove Chrysler to the brink. And that's where Renault came in.
Okay. So, I mean, I'm looking at pictures of the Pacer, and I do see the descriptions. I have a historical perspective question here. Is it still ugly? Or are we reaching a point where people are looking at Pacers in good condition and now it's become sort of like the ugly duckling? People like them for what they are.
When I photographed that green car that's in the book, and you look at it from the perspective of an engineer and a designer rather than as a car buyer, you go, this thing was brilliant. The passenger side door is 6 or 4 inches longer than the driver's side door, so you could get into the back seat without flipping it over. The subframe in front, something GM would use a lot, made it a little smoother ride than a full unit body. The tail of the car with the hatchback. There you go. The tail of the car with the hatchback.
Yeah.
Good enough for Tony Lapine at Porsche to copy for the 928. Pretty cool car. Just imagine if they hadn't been meddled with and it came out the way they had wanted it to.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I look at it. I don't know. I don't know if my mind would have changed between then and now because, styles and preferences change over,
Sure.
Minutes in some cases. But now I look at Pacers and I'm like, you know what? I'm kind of digging it.
Look at a Tesla Model X or a Model Y.
Yeah.
Look at a Pacer.
Yeah.
Not that different.
Yeah. Good point. Very good points.
Your point's well taken on the engineering innovations of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. In many ways, it was
brilliant designers. They had good people working for them.
But a number of different factors, external factors, sort of messed it up. Yeah.
Especially in the 70s.
Especially in the 70s.
And it affected the entire industry. It wasn't just AMC. They just were so small that they couldn't compete and they couldn't adjust and change quickly enough. They couldn't come up with new products. It was just too expensive. They had to adapt.
Dave, shall I take the last question?
Yeah, you take the last question.
All right. So, Tom, at the start of the 1980s, Chrysler was in bankruptcy. AMC had just rescued Jeep with about 600% growth for the brand. It should have been AMC's decade, and yet Chrysler buys them in 1987. What happened?
Renault. Really, it was Renault. Renault had poured something like $400 million into AMC. Initially, it was supposed to be just a marketing partnership. AMC dealers would sell Renault cars in the States in the late 70s. And they had some pretty cool cars, the Fuego, and they were okay.
So that the appliance
decided to get into manufacturing. It made more sense to build the Renaults here in the States. And right down the street from me in Kenosha, that's where they did them. And again, that Renault Alliance in 1983 was the right car for the right time, sold like hotcakes. Within 2 years, the economy improved. Nobody wanted them.
Yeah.
And again, it was the same story. They couldn't react to a new car fast enough, which became the Dodge Monaco eventually. They were bankrupt. And then the French government changed. And I think it was the Mitterrand regime, which owned Renault, it's a nationalized company, said, we're done. We're pulling out. Iacocca and his genius swooped in with very little money, bought them for Jeep specifically, but got a lot more out of it than he ever realized. And the rest is history, unfortunately.
Sure. Now, I retract what I said a moment ago about AMC Pacers because we're looking at, Pacers in the modern context, and I think I'm kind of digging them. I'm now looking at pictures of the Renault Alliance, and there's still nothing attractive about them.
They were a little plain. It was sad. The same gentleman that designed the Citroen DS21, Robert Oppert, designed the Alliance, but just a little too conservative.
Yeah,
if Dawn was here, Dawn is all about the sound of an engine.
Well, this one didn't have it.
I remember in a parking deck one driving by me one time in college and me saying, this sounds just like a dishwasher.
Yeah, very much.
Hence the reason I've always called it the Renault Appliance.
Right. Yeah,
the Renault Appliance. Yeah. But they were actually pretty nice cars. If they weren't in a salty environment, they were pretty nice cars. And again, that was Renault's meddling more than AMC's engineering. AMC were very rust resistant.
Yeah, that's the reason you still see a lot of them around.
That's right. That's right.
Salty environment, speaking of the French.
Absolutely. I didn't have enough room in the book to talk about the management changes and the dalliances of the French gentleman that came over here and ran the company, and it was interesting.
Gotcha. Let the record show. Without Misty, we made it almost an entire show without offending the French.
Almost. Pretty hard not to, but
where is
I love
Misty?
French cars. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah. So I'm looking again at pictures of the Renault Fuego, which has a bit more style than the Alliance did.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So cool, Tom. This has been excellent. Thank you. And the book is beautiful. I encourage everybody to check it out. Go to Quarto. Is it Quarto.com? And
yes.
They should be able to see it there.
Right. And any other bookseller has it. It actually doesn't come out until the 29th of October.
Oh, okay. Well,
So
by the time this episode's out, yeah.
Yeah.
We'll link to it on the website, but it's the complete book of AMC Cars, American Motors Corporation, 1954 to 1988.
And a quick note, my books tend to be, they're people books wrapped around cars. And you'll see little stories here and there about the people behind that, because cars are interesting, people are fascinating.
Yeah.
The stories that you have built around it are really amazing.
And a lot of those stories are due to Pat Foster's research. He's interviewed those people, and that's where he really came in and helped out a huge amount.
Tom, thanks again for taking the time on a weekend to be our guest today. I can't wait for the next time. And I do encourage our listening audience to go check out the book. It's going to make a great Christmas gift for some AMC lover out there. Yeah. So thanks again, Tom. Thanks, Dave.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah, hop to it, Tom. Write another one. We want you back.
All right. Yeah. Sounds good.
Take care, everybody. See you soon.
Thank you for listening. This has been The Thing About Cars. We'll see you on the road.